What's up everybody, it's Pouria again with another design review. This time we're in the C8 Corvette Convertible. Let's get right to it. As always, we're going to break up our design review into three categories: the exterior design, the interior design, and the driving experience. For exterior design, we have three subcategories. The first read, which is the overall volumes and proportions of the car, the silhouette. The second read, which is when you get a little bit closer and you can analyze the lines, the volumes, the major graphics. And then the third read is the little details, the jewelry of the car that really give it that depth of styling and design. So the C8 Corvette is the first Corvette ever with a mid-engine layout. It's entirely different in its proportions and its silhouette than any previous generation of the Corvette. Corvettes traditionally have had a beautiful classic front engine, long hood, cab rear-wheel drive proportion. The C8 might not have the most beautiful mid-engine proportion. It's not directly comparable to the high-end Ferraris or Lamborghinis of the world. But given the fact that it's a $60,000 to $80,000 car, it's truly mind-blowing. And although it's a little bit larger and a little bit more spread out and not as tight of a package as a lot of exotic mid-engine supercars, it still has a nice overall proportion, a beautiful silhouette, especially the convertible. Purely from a styling standpoint, the C8 Convertible is a slightly more successful design than the coupe. So it gets a 9 out of 10. And moving on to the second read, the volumes and the lines and the proportions. This is an area that a lot of people have complained about with the C8 Corvette, and those complaints are valid. We're not talking about a meticulously designed Pininfarina car like a Ferrari. No, this is a Corvette. The focus of this car is more on the performance than anything else, so it's no surprise that the styling is only secondary to the performance, and the shape of the car and the lines of the car have to follow suit with the functionality of the package, of the aerodynamics. There's some questionable areas with the character lines, with some volumes, especially in the rear corners of the car. There's certainly room for improvement. So it gets a 5 out of 10 in the second read subcategory. And moving on to the finer details of the car, the third read. Again, this being a Corvette and being a Chevy, there hasn't been a super high level of attention to detail. It's not overly crude or too simple like a Tesla per se, but it's not necessarily as detail-oriented and full of fine, beautiful jewelry as a more expensive vehicle or even a luxury vehicle. It's not ugly, it's not poorly designed or poorly manufactured, but it's not necessarily anything special. So it gets a 6 out of 10. So that's an overall exterior design score of 20 out of 30. Now moving on to interior design. The interior space of the C8 Corvette is a very nice place to be. It's very well designed and styled. It's very ergonomic as well. And it does a really good job of making you feel like you're driving a supercar. In the interior design category, we also have three subcategories: the overall design theme, the interior details, and the ergonomics. Each one is scored out of 10 points for a total of 30. So let's get started with the overall design theme. Of course, anybody who's been inside or even seen photos of the interior of the C8 Corvette will attest that it's a very striking look. It's very aggressive and driver-oriented, which is exactly what you want for a car like this. It has very strong character. Everything is designed with very fast, intentioned lines. It truly gives the interior of the C8 an aggressive look, more so than any supercar even that I can think of. So it's a very successful interior design theme, and I would give it a 10 out of 10. Then moving on a little bit closer to the interior details, it's not exactly a Lexus or a Mercedes where you see a lot of attention to detail and a lot of beautiful materials and perfectly engineered touch points. However, it's pretty good for a Corvette, and again, considering that this is a Chevrolet, the initial quality seems very nice. Some people have had complaints and questions about the button setup along the center console, but I think once you use it a couple of times, it's very intuitive, and it does a good job of dividing climate control functionality from all the rest of the beautifully spaced center console and the interior space. It allows for the focus of the attention to be in this area. So I think it's very well done by the Chevy designers and engineers, and it gets a 7 out of 10. And the final subcategory in the interior design is the ergonomics. And a lot of people might think that because of the move to the mid-engine layout, that the interior space of the C8 is less ergonomic than the previous generations, but that's actually not true, because the cabin has been spaciously designed, and it's probably even more comfortable and spacious than the previous generations. And spatially, it's very well thought out. Everything is really designed within the reach of the driver. There's enough space in the cabin for you to adjust your seating position to your liking, which is really nice. The only downfall of this generation as compared to the previous ones is that there isn't really any extra cargo room behind the seats for any sort of a purse or bag or backpack. So that subtracts from the practicality a little bit. But overall, a great spatial design, a beautiful place to be, very comfortable, very nice, very sporty. And the mid-engine layout also means a lot more visibility out the front, which is nice. So the C8 Corvette gets an 8 out of 10 in this subcategory. And that adds up for a total of 25 out of 30 for the interior design category. And lastly, let's talk about the driving experience, or the X factor, which is the most important aspect of the experience of any sports car, and the category in which the C8 Corvette really shines. The driving experience category is also divided up into 3 sections: the driving position scored out of 10, the user engagement scored out of 10, and the sound, which is the only subcategory, scored out of 20. So let's start by talking about the driving position. Although this is a mid-engine car, and yes, it's vastly different from any previous generation of the Corvette, it's also a little bit different than many other mid-engine cars, because it's, as we mentioned, a little bit more spacious than a lot of other mid-engine cars, a lot of exotic supercars that we can think of. The interior doesn't feel cramped, but it does feel like it surrounds you very well. The experience of driving the drop top is ever so slightly different from the coupe, but the position is more or less the same. And the driving position of the C8 Corvette, to me, is practically optimal for the type of high performance driving that this car is meant to do, and yet still very much daily drivable. So it gets a 9 out of 10 in the driving position subcategory. Then let's move on to the user engagement and the user experience. This is an important category for sports cars, and generally having a manual transmission really adds to the experience. But I have to be honest, the dual clutch transmission does a great job of connecting the driver to the power and the performance that the car is capable of. You also feel very much in control of where you shift. It's very responsive, it's very fast, and especially in the sportier modes, it gives you a lot of freedom to really play and have fun with it. But overall, every way in which you want to interact with your car, the C8 Corvette will oblige. So it's a great sports car in that sense, and in the user engagement subcategory, it gets a 9 out of 10. And finally, let's talk about the sound. And the C8 Corvette sounds absolutely amazing. It doesn't lose its classic American V8 sound, but it adds a little bit more of a high-tech, modern character to it. Especially if you really open the throttle and let it go, the exhaust will really come to life and give you a perfect soundtrack to all the other adrenaline that you're experiencing. And even when you rev it in neutral, it just sounds incredibly heavenly. But one complaint that myself and my colleagues had about the car. One area in which we were somewhat underwhelmed was the fact that the exhaust sounds a little bit too quiet, especially in the lower rev range, which is where most people are going to be doing most of their driving, especially in the city. It just feels like there is a few decibels missing from the sound of the car in the lower rev range, especially for a Corvette, especially for an American V8 powered car. So that feels like sort of a missed opportunity. And yeah, that can always be enhanced with aftermarket parts, but it feels like when you're getting a Corvette, the pinnacle of American sports cars and the performance, that seems like a department that you want to have it absolutely dialed in. So ever so slightly disappointing, but still a fantastic sounding car. You just got to be able to open up the throttle a little bit more to be able to truly experience the beautiful sound of it. And it gets a 17 out of 20 in the sound category. And that adds up for an overall driving experience score of 35 out of 40. And adding up the exterior design, the interior design, and the driving experience scores, we get a total design score of 80 out of 100 for the C8 Corvette Convertible. So where the C8 Corvette Convertible somewhat falls short in the departments of exterior design and attention to detail, it really makes up for it in terms of the driving experience. But overall, a truly amazing car to experience, a great car to own, plus it gets the attention of everyone everywhere you go. And that takes care of our design review for the C8 Corvette Convertible. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.